Straight all day.
You're now tuned in to the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves you to make things happen instead of wait for things to happen. We put all this together in one bundle, one package, one philosophy, one method, one mindset, one book, one show. And we call it Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. Today's topic is how to earn your right to hold people accountable. You know, there are times in life when maybe you have been on the receiving end of it, or maybe you've been on the giving end of it, where you see someone who is not doing what they're supposed to do. Maybe they're not living up to their reputation. Maybe they're not performing up to a certain standard. Maybe you just feel like they're just not delivering the way that you want them to deliver, or the way that you think other people will want them to deliver. And you decide that it's your right or responsibility to hold that person accountable. Maybe you do this, anybody who follows sports, maybe you do this. You see a wide receiver not catching the passes, or a basketball player not making any shots, or not grabbing enough rebounds, and you want to hold that person accountable by making a certain comment. Maybe you even go as far as reaching out to that person directly. Maybe you've done this with someone who you follow online, who may not be as hard to reach as the person you see on TV, and you feel like whatever they're doing, they need to be held accountable for it, and you say something to them, and maybe you got a response from them. Maybe it was favorable, maybe it wasn't, maybe you got completely ignored. Who knows? Maybe you've been on the receiving end of this, where a person who you may or may not know decides to hold you accountable for something that they believe you are not doing properly, that you could be doing better, that you need to step up in some way, shape, or form, but they decide to hold you accountable. And maybe whoever this person is, if you do know who they are, maybe you're looking at them kind of crazy. Like, I understand what they're saying, but why are, of all people to be saying something to me, why are you the one who's saying something to me? Or maybe somebody who you never heard of, and you may say the same thing. I understand what you're saying, but I'm trying to figure out why you feel you are qualified to say something to me. And I want you to understand that even though you may feel completely justified in holding someone accountable, or calling them out, or speaking out about something that you see another person doing, just because you see something does not mean you are qualified to say something. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. There are several reasons why this is, and we're going to get into that here in our points here today. But I want to make sure, just in case you haven't, you know about the classes that we've done in the past where we talk about accountability. Two specific ones where we talked about closing your accountability gaps, episode 765 and episode 688, how to hold yourself accountable even when you don't have someone such as a coach or trainer or boss looking over your shoulder in life. So if you're able to hold yourself accountable, hopefully not too many other people will need to hold you accountable. And when you're a person who holds yourself accountable, A, you won't even be concerned too much with what other people are doing to even be thinking about holding them accountable. And B, when you are holding yourself accountable, people will notice that. You'll have a reputation for doing so, and people will come to you asking you to be someone who will hold them accountable. Now, that's when you're really where you need to be. That's when you're really in there to hold other people accountable, when someone asks you to do it, or you're in a certain position that inherently it just comes with the territory, such as you're a parent and you have kids. They don't have to ask you to hold them accountable. You just do it because that's your right as a parent, your responsibility even as a parent, or as a boss or owner of a company. You have people working for you. It's your responsibility and your right to hold those people accountable. But if there's no such relationship and a person has not asked you to hold them accountable, you got to be careful with doing so, because you may not have, in their eyes, in the eyes of the person that you are talking to, you may not have earned the right to be holding that individual accountable. And they may have a problem with you trying to hold them accountable, because they're looking at you like, who the hell are you to be holding me accountable? Who are you to be telling me anything? I don't know you, or you don't have the position that I have, or you don't have the reputation that I have, or you don't have the resume that I have. What makes you believe you can hold me accountable? And you may think that you're right in doing so. They may think that you're not. But let's remember, what's the goal of communication? The goal of communication is not to hear the sound of your own voice or to bask in your own personal eloquence. Is to get your point across to the other person. If the person you're trying to get your point across to does not want to hear it, or they don't want to hear it from you, then your communication fails. So you have to make sure that when you are communicating, especially when it comes to holding someone accountable, which is some form of constructive criticism, that they're open to hearing, first of all, whatever you have to say. Second of all, they're open to hearing it from you. They might be open to hearing it, just not from a person in your position, maybe from somebody else. And I talked about this and touched on this in masterclass number 1297, how to master your anti-people skills. And some people have a lot of anti-people skills where you don't quite understand that just because you believe something, just because you know something, just because you think something is, quote, true, close quote, does not mean everybody wants to hear it. And damn sure doesn't mean everybody wants to hear you say it. And you may just you may be a little rough around the edges in how you communicate things to people. Maybe they would want to hear it from you if you knew how to say it the right way. And these are all failures of communication that people make. A lot of people think that the key to communication is having the right words and putting them together the right way and making sure you're telling people exactly what they need to hear. And that's not true. It's how you say things, who you say things to, what you're exactly saying, and who you are in relation to the person you're talking to. All of those matter when it comes to communicating your point. And if all of them are not, if you're not on the right wavelength with each one of those, then your communication is going to fail. I also talked about this in class number 1260, people skills that will improve your interpersonal relations immediately. So if you have not referenced those, 1297 and 1260, I suggest you listen to both. As a game group member, you have full access to all of it. Please take advantage. So let's get into our points here today, which is the topic of today, which is earning your right to hold people accountable. And yes, this is a right you must earn. Just seeing something and believing something and knowing stuff does not give you a right to hold people accountable, in case you didn't know. I know some people think that, but it's not true. Point number one, just because you see something that a person could improve does not mean that you are qualified to speak on it. As I just said, as I talked about in yesterday's message, we buy the messenger before we buy the message. So the message may be perfect. Listen, you may have put the words together perfectly. You may have said the exact right thing. But if people aren't buying the messenger, they're not going to hear the message. The message goes in one ear and out the other. Have you ever felt like you gave somebody the exact message that they needed to hear? You told them the exact thing that they needed to fix, the exact area in which they could use improvements, and you knew what the improvements were. You even went as far as to tell them, hey, you need to improve in this area, and you told them exactly how to fix it, exactly what to do. But it appears that they didn't want to hear from you. It appears that they weren't listening to you. Maybe they ignored you. Maybe they let you know in maybe a hostile way that they weren't interested in hearing things from you, or maybe they weren't interested in hearing things, period. Has that ever happened to you? If you consider yourself to be very smart, I'm sure it's happened to you before, because it usually happens to smart people more than it happens to dumb people. With smart people, usually we see things that other people don't see, and we want to communicate them to other people, especially if you think you're eloquent enough when it comes to communication. You probably made this mistake of offering unsolicited advice, and it didn't work. It was a waste of energy on your part. You may have damaged or ruined their relationship or a potential relationship because of offering your unsolicited advice. This is the point that you must drill into your head. It was the topic of yesterday's masterclass. We buy the messenger before we buy the message. If people have not bought into you, they do not want to hear from you. If you are not respected in a space, or looked to, or expected to be heard from in a space, your message, even if accurate, even if correct, even if perfect, even if it's 100% quote the truth, because truth is relative, close quote, often your message will not be heard. You have to earn your right to call people out, and people, whoever those people are that you're going to call out, many times they will have to self-select as someone who wants to hear it from you. Now, there are some people, like I said, there are some inherent relationships where, such as like a parent child relationship, a teacher student relationship, a coach coachee, or someone, if you hire a consultant or you sign up for somebody's coaching program, or you're a player on some coach's team, or you're an athlete and you have an athlete who's taking you under their wing to mentor you. In those situations, you don't have to come out and say specifically, hey, I want you to correct me, I want you to hold me accountable. You understand by entering into that type of relationship that person's going to hold you accountable. That's the whole point of them being there. But in other situations, you have to earn that right. You either have to be asked explicitly, or you have to feel like, by reading the nonverbal cues, that person is open to hearing those things from you. If you're unsolicitedly offering feedback to a person or trying to hold someone accountable for something for which they have not asked you, then you may have a problem, or you may run into an issue. I'll tell you a story how my mother once was telling me that a family member of mine was giving a speech somewhere. Now, I wasn't there for the speech. It was happening somewhere that I was not at. But a family member of mine was giving a speech talking about whatever he was talking about. I don't know exactly what it was. And my grandmother, my mother's mother, was there, and my mom was there. They were both there in the audience attendance, listening to my family member give this speech. Now, after it was over, actually, I don't know if my mom was there, but my mom was telling me the story. After it was over, my mother and my grandmother were having their own private conversation later on, days later. And my grandmother, because she had been a teacher, she's retired, but she was a teacher for many years in the Philadelphia school district. She, as I told you, being a teacher is a professional speaker. So she has presentation skills. She knows how to get on it in front of a room of people and make her points and make her presentation, or at least she believes she does, right? Because we all believe we know what we're doing, right? I'm not saying my grandma doesn't know what she's doing, but you get my point. Now, my grandmother, because she had all this seasoning as a professional speaker in the teaching world, she believed that she could help my family member with his presentation skills. So she had some pointers that she wanted to offer to him. And I think she had probably spent a lot of time thinking about it. Maybe she had even written it down. She could point out all the things that he could have done better, all the ways he could do it better, all the skills that he could sharpen up, all these things that she wanted to share with him about getting better, right? And this is my mom telling me this whole story. But the challenge was, here was the problem. My family member who had given the speech, he had not gone to my grandmother and asked her for her feedback. He didn't ask her, yo, what do you think of my presentation skills? What do you think of my speech? What can I do better? How can I improve? Where was I not good at all? What was the best points? He never asked any of those questions. He did not ask her for any feedback. In other words, here's what the point of this story, he had not asked my grandmother to hold him accountable. Therefore, she, no matter how qualified she believed she was, relative to his perspective, she was completely unqualified to hold him accountable. Why? Because he didn't ask her to hold him accountable. And that's what I want you to get. If no one asks you to hold them accountable, you must tread very, very, very lightly. Hopefully don't tread at all, if you can read between the lines, of holding another person accountable when they haven't asked you to hold them accountable. Now, if they know who you are, they know what you do, or they have some idea of your background or what you've done or whatever qualifications you believe you have, yet they're still not asking you to hold them accountable, that should be telling you something. Maybe they just don't want to hear it from you. And you might just have to swallow that pill. All right, that they just don't want to hear it from you. Okay, if you really have something to offer the world that is valuable, there are people out there who want to hear it. All right, you don't have to force feed it down the throats of people who don't want it. Go give it to the people who are asking for it. And if they're not asking for it, then again, that's telling you something. If you're a chef or a cook and you think you make the best food in the world, whatever type of food you make the best steak in the world, all right, you might think that everybody at the yoga studio needs to taste this steak because it's great steak. Anybody who eats food will love this steak. But what if all those people in the yoga studio are vegans? All right, even though your steak is amazing, even though they eat food every day, even though they're hungry after their yoga session, their hot yoga, 1 hour hot yoga, all right, they're not interested in what you have to offer. So you are not qualified to give your message to those people because they're just not open to it. And what if they are steak eaters? All right, what if they're coming out of a boot camp class and they all eat steak, but they don't want your steak because they don't like the way you look. They don't like where you're from. They don't like people of your color or your gender or your race or your nationality or your religion. They don't want to hear it. All right, don't try to force feed your message, accountability or not, to people who aren't interested in it. Go find the people who are. If you are talking to people who are not interested in your message and you're trying to force them to believe it, then you're wasting your time. You're doing yourself and your business and those people a disservice because nobody's gaining anything from it, especially not you. You must earn your right. We're on this message of accountability. I'm just giving you a message of giving your message, period, to anyone. This one happens to be accountability, what we're talking about today. You must earn your right to call people out, holding them accountable. You'll know that you've earned this right when people start asking you to hold them accountable. Has anyone ever asked you, hey, can you hold me accountable for this? Can you help me out with this? Can you point out what I've done wrong? Can you show me where I'm making mistakes? Can you tell me what my areas for improvement are? If people aren't asking you that question, then maybe you have not quite earned your right to hold anyone accountable. And ask yourself this question. If that's happening, if you believe you could hold people accountable, but nobody's asking you to do so, here's where you self-assess. Am I holding myself accountable? How accountable am I holding me? Because the more accountable you hold you, the more likely other people will notice it and they'll want you to do the same thing for them. So when you look at any of you who's had people ask you to hold them accountable, usually they're asking you to hold them accountable for doing the same things that you hold yourself accountable for, because they can see in your actions that you're good at holding yourself accountable for those particular things. If you're a person who gets up early in the morning, there may be somebody asking you, yo, can we work out together in the morning, or whatever it is you do in the morning? Can we go to work in the morning? Can you call me in the morning? Whatever it is you're doing, they want you to hold them accountable for the things that they can see you hold yourself accountable for. If you have big muscles, somebody's going to ask you, hey, can you hold me accountable for going to the gym and doing my workouts? Because obviously there's some level of accountability that led you to having all those muscles that you got. Whatever it is you're doing, if you're doing well in business and they notice, they're going to ask you, can you help me out with my business? Because they see that something that you're doing is holding yourself accountable that led to those results. They want the same results, so they want you to hold them accountable. If nobody's asking you to hold them accountable, maybe you are not doing a good enough job of holding yourself accountable yet. Or maybe just not doing a good enough job of making it known. People don't know what you're doing, then they can't know that you're good. What is unseen counts for nothing. 48 Laws of Power, I believe it is chapter 8. Draw attention at all costs. Court attention at all costs. I believe it's either chapter 8 or chapter 4. I can't remember. Just read the book. What is unseen counts for nothing. If you're great at something but nobody knows about it, then it doesn't matter that you're great at it. People have to know. We are in the attention economy, ladies and gentlemen. If you don't have people's attention for what it is that you're doing, the right people's attention, not just anybody's attention, but the right people's attention for what you're doing, then it doesn't really matter that you're doing it, does it? If nobody's asking for your accountability, that's telling you something. But here's a caveat. Unqualified people who do not have the right to hold you accountable, they still have a right to say whatever they want, right? I mean, if you use social media, especially if you have any type of following, especially if you ever shared a message that is not going along with what is already accepted, you're not just blending into the crowd, you're offering something that is not already there. People do have the right, and they will exercise this right, to say whatever they want to and about you. However, and this leads to point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is earning your right to hold people accountable. Point number 2, accountability is not about making a public issue out of things. Accountability is not a show. Now, accountability is not a performance. If you really want to hold someone accountable for their actions or their inactions, making a public issue out of things is often not necessary. And I'm bringing this up for you if you happen to be involved in any type of group activity, whether you're a part of a team, whether you're a member of or you run an organization, even a family, or of course on the internet where anything that's broadcast, anything that's said publicly, everybody can see it. Anything that is team based, where everybody can kind of see the communication that you're having or hear or experience the communication that you're having, you got to be very careful about holding people accountable in a public forum in a way that everybody can hear it and everybody can see it. As a matter of fact, I was talking to a coaching client of mine not too long ago. He's a basketball player, and he was talking about the fact that on his team, when he's in practice, the coach will call him out for some type of mistake that he made that he might not have even made, but the coach will use him as the person to point out the mistake to. And then the player said, no, I understand why the coach is doing that. And this guy's a professional player, so he understands this, is that on teams, there are different personalities. And anyone who's in charge of a group, you have to be wise enough to understand and know who are the people that you can call out publicly. You can hold them accountable publicly in front of everybody for a mistake that they made, or maybe they didn't even make. And who else on that team can you not call out in public like that, because they just can't take the public, some people will consider that to be humiliation or embarrassment or being called out like that. Some people are all right with that. They can take it. They have thick skin. They can handle it. Other people can't handle it at all. So you had to be wise enough to know who you can call out and who you can't. I know there are a lot of coaches who listen to the show, sports coaches. You know this. If you don't know this, then you're probably going to do very poorly in relating to your players if you don't know who you can call out in front of the whole team and who you need to pull aside and talk to one-on-one. And the player who I was talking to, the client that I was telling you about, he understood this. He said, I know that sometimes the coach will say something to me. He's really trying to get the message to anyone else, to somebody else, but he knows that he can say that to me and I'm not going to flip out. I'm not going to be upset. I'm not going to cuss him out. I'll take it. But not everybody can take it. So the point that I'm making here, we're still on point number 2. The topic again today is earning your right to hold people accountable. Holding people accountable is not a show. It's not a performance. If you want to hold people accountable, you have to be careful about who you're holding accountable in a public forum. And public could be in front of one person. It can also be in front of a million people. In these broadcasting times that we live in, that part is usually this part of making a public issue out of holding someone accountable, or at least that's what you call yourself doing. All right, is usually utilized by someone who's really just trying to bring attention to themselves, not really to the issue, or not really to the person that they're talking to, or whatever it is that they're doing. You have to know, you got to be able to read between the lines on this. When I was playing my freshman year of college, playing basketball at Penn State Abington, I had a teammate who was looked at as a leader on the team. This guy was actually one of the captains on the basketball team. But this guy, I didn't see him as a leader. He was looked to as a leader, and he had the title of leader, but I didn't see him as a leader, and there's one specific reason why. This guy was the kind of guy who would never take a teammate aside and say something to help that teammate. He wouldn't, if he saw you messing up or making a mistake or messing up a play, or you just didn't have the right type of energy, or it seemed like you were kind of out of it mentally, he would not pull you aside and say, yo, let's talk about this, or let me help you out with this, or yo, come to practice early, or stay after practice so we can talk, or I can show you something, or anything like that. He would never do that. But this is what he would do. When we were in the middle of practice or within earshot of the coaching staff, this guy would call out a player loud enough that the coaches would hear it, and the coaches would suck all this up, and they thought this guy was being a leader. Whatever that he would say to a player and within earshot of the coach would buy into it and basically co-sign what this quote leader, close quote, had just said. And the coaches didn't notice this. So this caused a little bit of tension within the team. Actually, a lot of tension within the team, because the players saw that this guy was putting on an act, that this guy was putting on a show. And I've been on many teams. I've seen many basketball players do this over the years, where they put on a show in front of the coaches, but when the coaches are not around, all these leadership traits are nowhere to be found, because this person's not really a leader. They're just putting on a show. So you got to be very careful with this. And any of you who's running a team, you got to be careful of being fooled by people within your team doing this, because if you're not noticing it and nobody calls that person out or brings it to your attention, you may be buying into it, and this is going to cause tension within the team. It's going to cause resentment, because the players are looking at you like, all right, this fool doesn't notice that this dude's putting on a show, and because you're co-signing the guy who's putting on the show, nobody wants to say anything to you, because you're looking at this guy as a leader, but he's not. But everybody on the team knows it, but you don't know it. So then you can have all kinds of problems that go on when the person in charge, you, the person on top, is not noticing what's going on. I've seen a lot of people do this and fool people with it. It's all an act. And this is not just in sports. This happens in business. This happens in work situations. And this is why these people are not really respected as leaders. They are listened to as bosses, but they're not respected as leaders by people who actually know what's going on, which leads to point number 3. Today's topic is you must earn your right to hold people accountable. Point number 3, contrary to popular belief, holding people accountable is not about pointing out someone's mistakes or demanding that they be corrected, or trying to make yourself look like you're in charge or make yourself look like a boss. That is not what holding people accountable is about. You might think that's what it's about. That's not what it's about. Let me tell you what it is about. The essence of accountability is that the subject of your accountability, the person who receives the accountability that you're holding them to, they must know that you care about them as a person more than you care about hearing the sound of your own voice. That one I'm going to repeat. The essence of accountability is that the person you're talking to must know that you care more about them as a person than you care about hearing the sound of your own voice. Some people think that holding people accountable just means they messed up and you're pointing it out. All right, they shouldn't be mad when I'm telling them the truth. And I use air quotes when I say truth, because everyone's truth is relative. See, that kind of rhetoric, you messed up and I'm pointing it out and I'm making sure everybody knows, don't be mad at the truth. Don't be embarrassed. If you messed up, you messed up. I'm calling you out. Everybody got to be able to take it. That kind of rhetoric falls on deaf ears. Now, you may have been around someone, maybe a parent, a coach, a boss, who did that. And because that's all you know, you might think that's the way you need to do things. That doesn't work, especially in the world that we're in now. The world that we're in now is very, very democratic, or it's not as top down as it used to be. I think everyone who's been around long enough understands that. It used to be very top down. It's not top down anymore. It's very flat. Okay, it's very horizontal now. It's not vertical anymore. Meaning, if you're going to call somebody out and point out their mistakes or do something that would possibly embarrass them, because embarrassment is a state of mind. It's not an action, it's a state of mind, which means the way you talk to one person, they can take it, and the way you talk the same way to another person, they can be embarrassed by it. So you got to be careful with your communication. You have to tell your communication based on the person you're talking to. And these times, these top-down, democratic, horizontal times, you got to be very careful at calling people out in a certain way, because you don't know how people are going to take things, and based on the context of how you give it, where and when you give it. You probably done this before and made the mistake of thinking that that's what accountability was about. Accountability is not about being the asshole who calls everybody out, and every time a mistake's made, everybody knows you're going to yell at somebody and just make them look like a fool for making the mistake that they made. My third college coach, I played for 3 different coaches in college, was the last coach that I played for. This guy's I think he probably believed that this was what accountability was. This point right here would be perfect for him. He actually passed away about 10 years ago, but this point would be perfect for him, is understanding the essence of accountability. It's not about just calling people out. When we would be in practice, and I wrote about this, if you're not on my email list, you don't get my articles, then you can go to dreallday.com/blog to read my articles, and even better, go to workonmygame.com, get on my email list. But anytime a player messed up in practice, he would even do it in the game. If somebody messed up, the coach would stop practice or call timeout in the game. This guy would actually call timeout in the game. We would come into the timeout huddle. Now, you've seen a basketball timeout huddle, right? Where the coaches are, going over plays and stuff like that. The coach would spend the entire timeout just bashing the player who had made the mistake. We wouldn't go over any plays. He wouldn't give us any tips. We wouldn't talk about strategy. He would just bash the guy who had made the mistake for the duration of the timeout, and then we just go back on the court and keep playing. This is what this guy did. And it's not about him, but because I know he was not the only person who ever did it. I'm sure somebody did it to him, and that's why he was doing it to us. And maybe some of the players who were on that team, maybe they're out there doing it to other players these days. I don't know how many of them are coaches these days, or anything that they're doing in life that they think accountability means just calling people out for their shit and telling them, don't be mad at the truth. Don't be mad because I'm calling you out. That kind of rhetoric will always fall on deaf ears. Even if people are acting like they're listening to you, they're not really. They're just waiting for you to stop talking. If you try it, you'll see. Nobody wants to hear that shit from just anybody. And even when you are qualified, even when you're the father, the mother, the coach, the boss, the owner, if I don't believe that you care about me as a person, I'm not really hearing what you're saying. Actually, let me change that. I'm hearing you, but I'm not listening to you. Meaning, I understand that you're making a sound. I heard the words that you said, but I'm not taking them to heart or I'm not taking them to heart in a positive way, because it seems like it's more about you than it is about me. You don't ever want to have that reputation amongst any group that you're tasked with leading. Even if you're a qualified individual. So bosses, coaches, trainers, owners, parents who are listening to me right now, this message is for you. Even though you are qualified and completely within your rights to hold other people accountable for their shit, and everybody has some shit with them, if they don't believe that you care about them, they're not hearing anything you're saying. Actually, again, they're not listening to anything you're saying. They're hearing it, but they're not listening. They got to stand there and look at you while you're talking because you're in charge. You got to make sure that you understand the difference between how people respond to a boss versus responding to a leader. We respond to bosses because we have to. We respond to leaders because we want to. Which one are you? Listen, I will take constructive criticism from any person who I believe cares about my success. But I'm not taking constructive criticism from a person who just wants to prove how smart they are by pointing out mistakes. And I'm pausing there to really let that one sink in, so you can really think about that. So you can really let that one marinate in your mind. Are you someone who actually cares about the person that you're holding accountable, or are you, quote, holding them accountable, close quote, because you just want to prove to them how much you know that they don't know? And here's the other question. What do they believe? See, it's not so much what you think it is, because you might think, well, yeah, I care about them. That's why I'm telling them. Do they believe that? Because if they don't believe it, they ain't hearing anything you're saying. So you're wasting everybody's time. This is the error that 97% of people make when pointing things out, when they're doing what they call holding other people accountable. This is the error that people are making. Thinking that you're doing it because, or fooling yourself into believing you're doing it to help another person because you really care about them. But they don't think that. They believe you're just showing off your eloquence, how smart you are. Refer again to episodes 1297 and 1260. The anti-people skills that are destroying your relationships. This is one of the worst ones. This one right here. Let me remind you that we are all narcissists. Me, you, and everybody. We are all narcissistic. We all care more about ourselves than we do about others. We are all putting ourselves number one. Most of the words that we speak are not about other people. Even when we're talking about other people, it's about us. I talked about this in my book, Work on Your Game. As the saying goes, you probably heard this before, you'll hear it again. When you criticize other people, you're saying a lot more about you than you are about them. What that means is, even when you are fully qualified to hold a person accountable, even when they want you to hold them accountable, when you do so, everything that you say is saying a lot more about you than it is about them. What I mean is the way that you hold a person accountable, the words that you use, the energy that you have behind it, how that person receives it, all of that is a reflection of you. It's not a reflection of them. That's a reflection of you. And if you are bad at, if your people skills suck, if your communication skills suck, if you have not yet established that you care about that person in their eyes, not your eyes, in their eyes, then your accountability will fall on deaf ears. And it will show a lot more about your character and your personality than it does about theirs. Because they're not the one talking, you are. So you better be very, very careful with this one. Accountability is a fragile tool, and it is not to be played with in the hands of amateurs. If you're an amateur when it comes to your people skills, I suggest you go to workonmygame.com/people and take the people skills course and sharpen up before you destroy more relationships. Before you ruin your own reputation even further than you may already be ruining it, and you don't even realize that's what you're doing. Let's recap today's topic, which is earning your right to hold people accountable. Since we know that everybody has the right, everybody has a megaphone, a right to hold people accountable, or at least what they call holding people accountable these days, understand that it's going to happen, that somebody's going to want to hold you accountable for anything, something that you're doing once you become a somebody in life, what we talked about a few days ago. And there are several reasons why not everyone is qualified, maybe not even you, to hold everyone else accountable. It's all relative, and today we're discussing why and how. Number one, just because you see something doesn't mean that you're qualified to say something. We buy the messenger before we buy the message, as we talked about yesterday. If you are not respected in the space by that person, your message, even if completely accurate, will not be heard. You must earn your right to call people out. You've earned your right when you know you have earned your right to call people out when people are asking you to hold them accountable. If nobody's asking you, then maybe that's a hint that you haven't earned your right. However, unqualified people will always have a right to say what they want, and they will use that right. So, point number two, accountability is not about making a public issue out of things. It's not about putting on a show. If you really want to hold someone accountable for their actions or inactions, making a public issue out of things, often not necessary, and often will make things worse. In these broadcasting times, with as many sensitive people as we have these days, you got to be very careful about calling people out on things, especially if you don't have a good gauge of their personality and they haven't established trust with you. I had a teammate in college who would never take anyone aside and talk to them one-on-one, but he would call anybody out in front of the coach, which showed that he was really putting on a show. It wasn't really about helping people. It was about showing how much of a, quote, leader, close quote, that he was. But those of us on the inside, we didn't respect him as a leader because we knew that he was putting on a show. And I've seen many people do this in many fields, not just sports. You make sure you're not doing it. And if you're a leader on a team, make sure you're not being fooled by somebody who always puts on a show in front of you, but they're not doing the same thing when you're not around, which leads to point number three. Contrary to popular belief, holding people accountable is not about pointing out people's mistakes or demanding that they be corrected or trying to make yourself look like a boss or a leader. The real essence of accountability is that the subject of your accountability knows that you care about them as a person over the sound of your own voice. Some people think that holding people accountable just means calling out that they messed up. You're pointing it out. They shouldn't be mad at the truth because you're telling them the truth. That kind of rhetoric falls on deaf ears. All right. Nobody wants to be force-fed, quote, the truth, close quote. Because again, your truth is not the same as everybody else's truth. If you've tried this before, you probably experienced it. You probably already made this mistake before. I'm just making sure you don't make it again, especially if you're a really smart individual. Nobody wants to hear that shit from just anybody. And even when it's from a qualified person, if I don't think that you care about me, I'm not hearing anything that you say. I will take constructive criticism from anyone if I believe they care about me personally and my success. I don't want to hear it from somebody who just wants to prove how smart they are by pointing out everybody else's mistakes. And this is the error that 97% of people make when pointing things out. And I talk about this again in 1297 and 1260 master classes. We are all narcissistic. We all care more about us than we care about him, her, or anybody else. And most of the words that we speak are not about anybody else, it's about ourselves. So as the saying goes, when you criticize others, you're saying a lot more about you than you are them, even your accountability. How you say it, when you say it, what you say it, who you say it to, who you say it in front of, and how that person receives it, all is a reflection of you as a person, more of a reflection of you as a person than it is a reflection of them. Work on your game. Dre all day.